The Deep End team acknowledges the traditional owners of the lands on which we work and live, pays respect to elders past, present and future, and recognises the importance of Indigenous knowledge to informing public debate. Our guest in this episode of The Deep End is Mayatili Marika. Mayatili Marika is a Yolŋu woman of the Rirratjiŋu clan. She is the University of Melbourne's Cultural Advisor and Partnerships Officer based in northeast Arnhem Land, and also chair of Dhimurru Aboriginal Corporation, which develops and implements culturally and environmentally appropriate resource management strategies around Nhulunbuy on the Gove Peninsula. She is an enthusiastic advocate for Yolŋu education. In this episode, we discuss the achievements and legacy of the world's first Yolŋu University professor, who sadly passed away a few weeks ago in September 2023. His family have given permission for the continuing use of his full name for professional purposes. His name was Brian Gumbula, and he was a Professorial Fellow in the Indigenous Knowledge Institute at the University of Melbourne. Mayatili is a fluent speaker of both English and Yolŋu Matta, so we therefore link you to Charles Darwin University's excellent Yolŋu Matta dictionary here in the description.
Welcome to our podcast, Gato, Mayatili, the Deep End, hosted by myself and Aaron Corn. We're here at the Ian Potter Centre, which is part of the Melbourne Conservatorium, and we're at the South Bank on Wurundjeri Bunurong country. Mayatili Marika is a wonderful young woman who hails from northeast Arnhem Land. She's a Rirratjiŋu traditional owner and I believe chair of the Dhimurru Aboriginal Land Corporation board. Is that right, Mayatili?
Yes, correct.
So, welcome.
Thank you both for having me today.
Namari.
Maimak, namari ne.
Yo, maimak ne.
Mark up me. Mayatili, Gato, mark up me. Please tell us about you. What's important about your life? What gives you inspiration? I know that people will be very keen to know more about you. Over to you.
Like I said, Namari Moko, thank you for having me here today. My name is Mayatili Marika. I'm a Yolŋu woman from the Rirratjiŋu clan group of northeast Arnhem Land, and I'm a traditional landowner of Nhulunbuy and of Irkala community here. I work for the University of Melbourne in the Indigenous Partnership team space, and it's a very fulfilling and wonderful thing to be able to be based here on my country and working on projects and partnerships between the University of Melbourne and Yolŋu stakeholders and other stakeholders in the region. I think I really take my kind of role as being the conduit between two worlds, both worlds, really, really seriously, because I think that there's so much potential for tangible and meaningful pathways that can be built together and walked down together between Yolŋu and Balanda, and through research and discovery. So many of the incredible facets and dimensions of Yolŋu knowledge systems, I think now is the time that they're kind of, there's an appetite, and it's wonderful that Yolŋu knowledge systems and Indigenous knowledge systems in general as well are really kind of, at the forefront of people's minds. And I feel like now's the time where they're being embraced and people are wanting to learn more and understand and see that, the 65,000 plus years of, intergenerational knowledge and the way in which we see the cosmos as such an important part of our identity, not just as Indigenous people or Yolŋu people, but as Australian people.
Yolŋu people are, especially the leaders and elders, are famously very generous in sharing their knowledge. And I have observed over many years that there are thousands upon thousands of people around the world who've learnt about Yolŋu culture because of their generosity, and that particular generation of very kind, wise people. What do you think? Well, do you agree with me? And what do you think drives that extraordinary generosity despite the history that they've endured?
Well, I think, I think there's a few layers to that. I think diplomacy is kind of inbuilt into the very core of our DNA as young people. And I think we have always found, and our ancestors and our people before us have found that kind of formula, which is if you share enough on your own terms of knowledge and cultural practices and identity and connection to country and land and sea, then that also helps strengthen and continue who we are moving forward. And I think, you just have to look back to, the proud history that us as Yolŋu people have with Macassan people from Sulawesi and that whole kind of connection, with our Indonesian brothers and sisters from, the Indonesian archipelago who came across on trade winds and left an indelible mark to the point where now ingrained in our songlines and our bungal and our manike and our mintji, so our dance, our songlines, our paintings and even our words make reference to the Macassan people and to the Quran and to Islam. And I think following on from all of that, the rich history that our people here in Arnhem Land have had with people like Donald Thompson and, many, 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 many scholars and academics after him, is that sharing and celebrating who we are keeps us strong and happy and healthy in our minds and in the way in which we see things.
York.
Most people don't know much about the long history of Macassan people coming to Northern Australia and how their cultural traditions became entwined with Yolŋu cultural traditions. Say a bit more about that, because people, many Australians have this stereotype of Aboriginal people being completely isolated from the rest of the world. There was a book in the 50s or 60s, The Timeless Land.
Oh, yeah.
We're trapped in some ancient time and isolated from the rest of the world. But the history of Arnhem Land completely defies that stereotype. So just tell us about your experience of all of this, please.
So the Macassan people ended up on the shores of northeast Arnhem Land looking or in search of the tripang, which is the sea cucumber, which from what we still understand today is quite a delicacy in places like China and beyond. But from back in those very, very ancient times to now, Yolŋu people, we don't eat them, we don't touch them, they're not a delicacy or even considered a food source. So I think, that was the inception or the genesis of welcoming, foreign brothers and sisters to these shores. And, the story that's been told to us for countless generations is pretty much our ancestors said, go ahead, we don't eat the tripang. you can collect them. And after that, every year on the trade winds, the people from Makassar would come across and set up camp. And because they were Muslim and because they were traders, and I guess their philosophy of trade was that you don't take anything for nothing, that began, I guess, that cultural exchange and that cultural practice of they gave our ancestors things in return from them collecting, the tree plant, which grew in a prolific kind of way in certain parts of northeast Arnhem Land. So the things that they traded, to this day, we still use the Bahasa Indonesian words for those kind of things. And so for example, our word for money is rupiah, and so major materials that were introduced into Yolŋu life were things like the batik, the cloth, and steel, bara, which is, machetes, marali, which is tobacco. And I guess over time the relationships that were built between the Macassan people and the Yolŋu people were such that I guess song and dance and ceremony would have been, I imagine, a way in which to communicate until enough Yolŋu people and enough Macassan people learned each other's languages. And so, I think as we all know, music has no boundaries, Dance has no boundaries. It speaks a universal language. So, over the many, many, many decades and, a very, very long time, then we absorbed, references to Macassan life, Macassan cultural practice, everything from playing cards to, looking through glass. I don't know what the English name is. Gumpa, like, what are they called? Like a spyglass.
Yeah. A telescope.
Yeah, telescope.
Yeah.
And Ngurali, and deeply embedded within funeral rites for Yolŋu people as well is references to Allah, and we look to Mecca before we bury people as well. So there's still that really fundamental reference to our brothers and sisters, and I think going back to what you were saying, Mukul, about what the generosity is, I think it works both ways, and I think it was wonderful, and I think for Professor Gumbula, and I think we'll get to that a little bit later.
Yeah,
there's a real sense of honour and pride that the stories that we tell through a Yolŋu lens about our Macassan brothers and sisters, they too in Makassar tell those same stories, but from the other side of the coin, which is a wonderful oral history that has stood the test of time. And I think, like I said, trade, reconciliation, diplomacy, cross-cultural awareness, all those kind of things were a fundamental part of these trade links that Yolŋu people had with Makassar. Still to this day, dotted along the coastline of northeast Arnhem Land, where you find groves of tamarind trees and also frangipani trees. They are still there's still those markers of where those Macassan people set up camp every year. So that's also a legacy that they leave through. The flora that we have here in northeast Arnhem Land.
That's a beautiful segue to our next topic, because 2 weeks ago we had a very significant loss at the University of Melbourne in the passing of one of the great living Yolŋu elders, living until 2 weeks ago, sadly, on the 20th of September, who in May last year had been appointed at the University of Melbourne to the Indigenous Knowledge Institute as a full professor, as a Professorial Fellow. And as far as we can tell, he's the first Yolŋu person in the world to ever have held the title of full professor at any university anywhere. We have full permission to use his name and images for ongoing professional use because both he and his family are quite adamant that his achievements should not be erased from history. And so we're talking about Professor Brian Gumbula, of course. And he was actually a very senior, properly traditionally trained ceremonial leader of exactly that Macassan contact law that you were just describing. He was one of the several leaders of Rirratjiŋu clans, in his case the Birkali-Gulpapungal clan, who holds ownership of beaches where Macassan traders before 1907, when the trade stopped, were allowed to land. And so, my involvement with Professor Gumbula was that I first met him actually at a music academic conference in Adelaide in 1998, if I recall correctly. So that was 25 years ago. We recorded nearly all of his manake, his public ceremonial song repertoire, at various sites on the places where those song series were for. So Nikawu, Gitan, Ganimbura, Ga Lunkocha. In 2005, because his older Wawa, who was one of my main teachers at the time, basically banged our heads together and said, "You're going to work together to do this because I want these things recorded."
Proper Yolŋu style.
Yeah. Well, you get used to it after a while. So all of those records are archived for the family and community use, of course, in the Mulka project at Yirrkala, which is one of our long-term and very valued research partners across various of our projects in northeast Arnhem Land. And Brian's life, without labouring the point, was punctuated by quite a few episodes of very, very ill health that took, often, a year or two to recover from. And so we had a, on and off sort of formal and informal working relationship, but we'd never really worked together in the same institution before. So when the opportunity for fellowships in the Indigenous Knowledge Institute came up, of course he knew who I was and had worked with me at least on projects that Joe Gumbula had put us on together before, and went for one of those fellowships. His appointment actually had to go all the way to the University Committee for Academic Appointments and Promotions because we're not allowed to appoint people to professorial roles directly on our own unless, it's a particular category of person coming in from, somebody, say, that we have a partnership with or something.
Yeah.
And so that went to a full university committee. And on the strength of his traditional knowledge, all the intensive decades of training he had to go through to acquire it, which we read in his application, which had been, set out very, very diligently. Plus the fact that he had a Master in Indigenous Knowledges from Charles Darwin University, which he and his wife Renelle Gundara had completed together at the same time, plus other sorts of experience that he had that were professional equivalent. The university committee actually decided to appoint him a full professor, and that's the first time that's ever happened. So
extraordinary feat, really, when you step back and realise the new trail that he's blazed for Yolŋu people, and the legacy that he will continue to have.
Yeah, well, he wasn't the first Yolŋu person to work as an academic.
No.
And indeed, I think there's an associate professor who's Yolŋu at Charles Darwin University at the moment who does very important birthing research. Joe Gumbula himself was I think he was at level C when he was appointed, so that's equivalent to senior lecturer, senior fellow. But, you know, to actually get a university like the University of Melbourne to acknowledge that kind of knowledge as having professorial status, I think is breaking a glass ceiling there.
Absolutely, and I think not before time, really, is it? Because I think, as we all know, Indigenous peoples, not just in Australia but worldwide, have ancient knowledge systems.
Absolutely.
And it's about finding where that intersection lies between Indigenous lenses and frameworks and how they fit into the academy, right?
Yeah. You know, the other beautiful thing about Professor Gumbula's career is that he very quickly was on multiple projects. He was doing research into native bees that I actually have to come and talk to you about, Mayatili, that, you know, people want to keep going. You know, most species of Australian native bee aren't even documented, so, you know, it's actually quite urgent. We don't even know what species we might have. We don't even know what species we might have lost because we don't know what they all are. He was doing research with colleagues across fine arts and music here on the South Bank campus, the Faculty of Science, Marcia's faculty in medicine, dentistry and health sciences that were exploring his own family's direct connection through bloodlines to that very Macassan cultural and trade exchange history that you mentioned before. He was doing a project on that. And we didn't really realise it at the time, but in February this year, both he and his wife Rinelle, as his carer, because Brian did have ongoing health problems throughout his life and did need carers to travel with him. He and Rinelle, Marcia, other colleagues like Lisa Palmer, Anthea Skinner, Kristen Smith were all able to go to Macassar, where they actually met their relatives. They actually met their cousins from marriages that had taken place before trade dried up in 1907.
It wasn't dried up, it was banned by the tax collector, Alfred Searcy, from the, part of the South Australian administration.
So, you know, I think those achievements were, you know, we really didn't know at the time that, you know, we would have a very short period left with him. But in retrospect, I'm very glad that project happened and that
very special and you know, the university's a way of kind of timing things perfectly. And I think you know, one of the big takeaways from that trip was that forever and ever there's always been references to the fact that there's villages in Macassar there, and there's people who look like us and have the same features as us, and vice versa. Here in Yirrkala, you know, those kind of strong Macassan genes that come through in some family lines as well. So I think it was, you know, Rinelle's talked about many times, and also in the last couple of weeks since Professor Gumbula has passed away, she's kind of been just really thinking about that trip and how important it was, and how the power of story also really keeps that spirit and that connection alive. And it was exactly how everyone had said that it would be, you know, obviously in a modern kind of, you know, construct, or, you know, but to meet actual real living family, you know, is incredible, once in a lifetime.
It struck me when I met him that Rinelle's cousin Mansour, who's been on delegations and boat crews that have done reunion voyages via sea to your part of Arnhem Land in the past. He looks uncannily like Dungatanga, Rinelle's father. It's like spitting image.
And that was like at the Garma Festival this year. A fellow called Abdi from Macassar.
Yeah, I've spoken with him. Yeah, Abdi. Yeah,
and so many of the Bungals especially Rirratjiŋus, and he knew the bungle but was dancing the Macassan interpretation of different song cycles, which everyone was just blown away with and super happy, and it was that kind of wistful thing, if only we could reconnect on a more tangible, regular kind of basis.
That happened at Somba Opu, which is where the was it 1998, Marcia? The 1998 Treepang Opera was rehearsed in Macassar.
Yeah,
and
wow.
we turned up at the museum there one day, and we started asking people if they had known the musicians who had performed both in that opera and in a later tour in 2005 that Brian and Renell had performed in with them. And in half an hour they turned up in full costume with all their instruments. And there was effectively an all dancing, all singing welcome ceremony. And then there was an undertaking at the end of that to meet again at the same place 2 afternoons later. And the only way I can describe that without going into
detail,
great detail about it, it was actually a full on ritual exchange ceremony. Like, it was absolutely a full on, completely integrated and seamless ritual exchange ceremony where both the Macassan cultural inheritors and Brian and Renell knew exactly what to do and knew exactly how to interact with each other in a seamless and very organic way. And it's very rare that I've ever seen anything like that just happen so spontaneously. You were throughout this entire trip, Marcia. What's your take on all of this?
The rapidity with which our hosts, the Macassan people, organised their people to arrive with all of their costumes and musical instruments was just astonishing. And we didn't really understand what they were doing, and suddenly they turned up.
Yeah.
And they began performing the most beautiful performances, some of which we have seen before.
But a lot of which we hadn't.
And a lot of it we had not seen before.
Yeah.
So, and it was all in the very building where a Yolŋu, delegation lived for some weeks in 1997, I think for about 6 weeks. That building we were in is an old palace. It's entirely made of forest timber, rainforest timber, and that is where the Yolŋu delegation lived and performed and rehearsed the Treepang opera with their Macassan collaborators. And so some of the very same Macassan collaborators were there, and they were asking about, the people that they'd been with, and they were very sad to hear about some people passing.
As were we, because some people we'd known on their side had passed too.
That's right. Yeah. But in addition to that extraordinary extended performance, it must have gone on for hours.
It did, and it was also a sort of time standing still moment, like everything stood still in that moment. It was extraordinary. I can remember.
But in addition to that, the previous day, you'll remember that old man, Professor Gumbula, and his widow, Renell, visited the palace in the city.
That's right, yes.
And were welcomed by a member of royalty.
Yeah, Joffrey.
Who likewise rang around and found Renell's relations, very close relations, her Macassan cousin, I think, and others, and they turned up and they put on a very formal welcome with, and they dressed Professor Gumbula and Ronell in Royal Macassan clothing, and laid out a feast and coffee. And then school children came, and there was another cultural exchange.
Yeah.
So people were, everywhere we went, tremendously excited to meet them and to be able to engage with them and to make the connections in a very deep and personal way.
And I think this is what I hear about these sorts of trips from Yolŋu people to Mikasa all the time, Mayatili, that people just find it welcoming and familiar, because it is.
It's going home.
It is. It is welcoming and familiar. It's culturally linked. Yeah.
And completely, like you said, I think it's that thing where when something is an inherent and intrinsic part of the narrative of history and context and meaning and identity, it just becomes, again, like an extension of one's identity or one's lens or what the landscape is. And I think also what a beautiful thing that all this time later, you fast forward to 2023, and the deep respect and love that the Macassan people and the Yolŋu people have for each other is hasn't that endured for a really long time, and
it's a beautiful thing. There is a we shot film, video everywhere we went on that trip.
Be very precious for the archives now.
Yeah, well, the intention is to make a documentary out of it, and again, both Professor Gumbula and the family are adamant that will happen no matter what. So that won't be slowed down, and when it comes out, it comes out. Can't tell you when yet, but there's a moment we captured on film. I think it was probably the very first of quite many sort of local Macassan museums and other sites that we visited, where I think somebody asked him from behind the camera, "How do you feel?" And Brian turns to the camera and says, "I feel blessed. I feel deeply blessed to be here." And even when we left the hotel at the end of the trip, when Brian and Ronell came down to the lobby, they wanted to make a point of very, very formally thanking every single member of staff downstairs in the lobby, because they felt they had been so well treated and taken care of. So, that's something amongst many things of Professor Gumbula's sort of work and achievements. And I think, in future episodes post-referendum, we can probably delve into this more, considering that your public song tradition, Manake, is one of the world's most famous musical traditions that nobody's ever heard of. But I was struck the week that Professor Gumbula finally passed. There were 8 of us, colleagues there. Marcia here with me, DVC Indigenous, Barry Judd and many others were there to pay their final respects to Professor Gumbula and support his family. Not to mention 3 of our students who were there that week anyway and had no idea what they were in for. But it was said. It was actually said by Mayatili Marika the day that we were saying goodbye to Professor Gumbula, that he said he was the first Yolŋu professor, but he won't be the last. And he made quite a formal speech about the importance of that achievement, and even went out of his way to thank me and Marcia by name for having been people on the inside of the university who have, very visibly made that opportunity happen. And I just wondered, from a Yolŋu perspective, with all the kids there and the family, hearing what was being said, with quite a large amount of the community coming out to pay their respects. What does this mean? What does this mean from a Yolŋu perspective, that there has actually been a Yolŋu person who is, you know, a Dilak, who has been through Dalkarameti, you know, ritual leadership training, obtaining the title of professor?
I think it's, I think it's kind of a bifold kind of response. I think on the one hand, as I'm sure Aaron, and Mukul, you've been around our family and our community for such a very, very long time. It's almost kind of like you'd have that response, well, of course he's the professor now. Of course. Finally, people are recognising from the Ballanda point of view, or from a university institution lens, that of course, it's only it stands to reason. I think there's definitely that on the one side, because the ascension of knowledge and understanding and leadership and manikaiga realm and all those things is not an easy ascension into leadership, and it's certainly not a quick one. In fact, it's complete opposite.
No, it's as hard as it can possibly be.
Exactly. So I think, again, like it's that's the same as becoming a professor in the Ballanda context in a university or tertiary setting, right? So I think we're finally coming to see that intersection between those two worlds, and I think that's on the one hand, but I think on the other hand, of course, immense pride, but also I think immense pride, but also astonishment, because Professor Gumbula was such a humble man.
He was, yeah.
That a lot of people, like, he didn't go around saying, well, I'm a professor now. He just got on with his business and, treated everybody the same, and was afforded the respect from everybody because he was such a beautiful, consistent, kind person who had such a wonderful energy and spirit to him. So I think that was also, part of, that deep pride and astonishment when Regina made that impassioned speech to collective community, which was, look at him. And I think, the layer on top of that is Yolŋu people, legacy and memory is a very important thing for us. So I think, the next step of the next chapter is, how do we all sufficiently amplify and honour the legacy, and like you said before, how do we keep breaking the glass ceiling through a Yolŋu lens and perspective within the institutions plural, and how do we ensure that, like you said, and like Regina said, he's the first but he's not going to be the last. So how do we make sure that this really is a precedent that he has set now for us? I think that's the questions moving forward, right?
Well, actually, Gato, there is a second Yolŋu professor.
Already?
I
think appointed in April, I found out the other day.
Yeah. Professor Yolŋu Marika.
Indeed.
Yunupingu, sorry.
Both.
Both,
barrel,
yeah.
But she is a Marika who married a Yunupingu.
That's correct,
clarify.
yes.
Yeah.
And she is a professor with us now, and she'll be assisting us with our education projects. And she is assisting us with our education projects, and we've
good news.
We've called on her for her assistance with a number of projects already.
So the precedent has been set and used now, which is good. But look, there is obviously a sustainability question, and it's important to keep the pedal to the floor, isn't it? With the momentum that we actually have generated here by sheer force of will, and coming up with better arguments for recognising the obvious excellence of Indigenous knowledge that these people represent. We really need to keep going forward with these sorts of approaches. And, like we say all the time when, we're talking amongst each other up your way, that, all people, all men and women, of that seniority and rank, they're all professors. We say that all the time. They're all professors in the Yolŋu system. It's just that the Australian qualifications framework has no way of acknowledging that.
Yes, absolutely, which is why this new way of looking at and approaching things to find, where that intersection lies, because it's already in existence, but just not as the Academy would know it, I think is a really wonderful and exciting new chapter for Indigenous people, and the whole kind of, I guess acceptance is the wrong word, I'm not quite sure what the right word is, but the understanding that Indigenous knowledge systems are a fundamental part of who we all are. No matter which mob you're from, or which state or territory, that's the gravitas, isn't it? The knowledge systems that have been passed down for countless generations.
Yeah. Well, it's a very good idea, Marcia, that you came up with this idea for this Indigenous Knowledge Institute here at this university, because we actually do have a mechanism for making these cases now, and we're not going to stop. It's as simple as that. That, we've started now and we are going forward no matter what. But on to the next topic. So Professor Gumbula and his wife Ronelle both support the Yes campaign and the upcoming referendum in 2 weekends. In fact, there is a video of a public lecture they gave here on campus at the University of Melbourne about 6 months ago on the university's websites and YouTube feed, which will remain up online because, of course, family and Professor Gumbula himself gave permission for that before he passed. And they were very strong advocates of the Yes campaign because they can see how the erosion of, well, not only the erosion, but the erosion and, discontinuity in public services in the part of the world where you are right now has, worsened since the 1990s in a quite disastrous way. And in that video, they go to great lengths to explain that. But I'm just wondering how you're feeling about the referendum as we head into the home stretch, and what your feelings are, both, I guess, on your own part and on the part of people in your community about what they're wanting from this referendum, please.
Well, I think we all, this weekend, have the ability to grow and mature together as a nation moving forward, to set the scene for what the landscape of this continent called Australia is. I think obviously my lens is different from other people, but I think regardless of what mob you're from, or what geographical location you kind of live in here in Australia, the one thing I think we all want and need moving forward is to have the opportunity for our voices to be heard. I think it's the listening and the understanding and the amplification, while still recognising and seeing that we are not homogenous peoples, and we come from many nations and many mobs, but through a Yolŋu lens, our voice our voice is the law. It's the Rom, it's the Manike, it's the Bungul, it's the Minchi. So our voices are those of our ancestors kind of that have come before us. And, we're really, really fortunate in this part of the world that we have really, really strong governance systems and rules and regulations by how we work and operate. But I think tangible change can only come when you're included to be part of the discussion. I think that's kind of the basis.
Yeah.
So, we will never be heard as individuals or collective groups of people unless we have a seat at the table of the decision makers or the people who have power and influence, on any kind of level. And so I think it's really important to vote yes next weekend, because the voice to Parliament being enshrined in the Constitution, regardless of which political parties in power at the time, gives us the opportunity to have that table and have that seat at the table to give recommendations on laws and to engage with different people and to be able to socialise ideas and to be able to progress things that I think have been stagnant for a very, very long time. I mean, it's really easy to get caught up in the deficit discourse model, but, I mean, the reality is many countless people have suffered the deleterious impacts of colonisation, Our brothers and sisters from around Australia, more so on the East Coast and some other places in this country, but that legacy lives on. And so at what stage do we will we be afforded the right to, be in the driver's seat or be at the helm of decision making and ideas, and growth and development as a country? And I think this is a really, really solid and important step forward in the right directions for all of us as Australian people.
Thank you for that. To be really blunt about it, where you're sitting right now today is one of the most impoverished, underserviced and disadvantaged regions on this continent. Would I be right in saying that?
Yeah, absolutely. But I think, we kind of don't know any different, right?
Yeah.
I think it's with that clarity of vision and understanding when you step into the bubble rather than stepping out of the bubble that you realise that, the tyranny of distance has been, it's hard. I mean, unemployment is really, really high. There's not a lot of services, not a lot of infrastructure. Food security is certainly a day-by-day, week-by-week perilous thing, depending on whether or not the barge from Darwin comes with, food supplies. These vast distances between communities and homelands. The price of living is just outrageous. You will hear a couple of weeks ago, and I'm sure it's always a bit of a shock when you come from kind of mainstream big smoke cities like Melbourne and you come to little places like here and you realise, the cost of living. I mean, even fuel, petrol and diesel is, $3 a litre or whatever it is. I don't really think it's probably in Melbourne or other places. But yeah, life's not easy.
No.
I mean, our lives are very full and incredible, and we're so blessed and fortunate to have everything that we do. But yeah, it's by no means an easy kind of existence when you live in remote Aboriginal communities in Australia. Absolutely not.
And you've lived in Melbourne and in Nhulunbuy where you are now, so you understand that disparity and the differential.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it shouldn't be like that, regardless of geography. All Australians should be afforded the same kind of access to healthcare and services and food security and employment and training and education. Also, that's a huge one. Education is the key.
Yeah. Well, I think food security is up there as well because, of course, without food security, you can't possibly have good health, can you?
No, absolutely not. Well, nothing exists in a silo, right?
No.
So, again, I think it's that thing, right? In order to make tangible change on a micro but also a macro level, you have to see things from a holistic viewpoint.
Yeah. Yeah. So look, the price gouging that I see when I go there is.
But see, you don't have the luxury of choice. I mean, that's the other thing. one supermarket, one post office, one clothes shop, one bakery. Yeah, we don't have the luxury of even, pushing back on all that, not to mention, flight prices. It's cheaper to go from Melbourne to LA or Melbourne to New York than it is to go from Melbourne to Nhulunbuy, just to put perspective for people.
But that's just the legitimate trade, isn't it? I mean, there's all kinds of bootleg after-hour shops and takeaways in Yirrkala, for example, and the price gouging there, which is highly opportunistic because it's a captive audience, often without motor vehicles. They can't afford the They can't afford the $70 one-way trip to go to Woolies. That's quite insidious, isn't it? That kind of price gouging.
Yeah, absolutely. But again, unfortunately, we don't have the luxury of the choice to be able to choose, who the service provider is for whatever that service is. And so I think the ability to be able to socialise and talk about these things and be at the table, I think sometimes a frustrating thing for us as normal people is we're so far removed from the East Coast and we're from such a remote place that, public policy making and legislation in Canberra doesn't necessarily take into account the practicalities of life in remote places in Arnhem, for example.
Yeah.
Practical application is very different from its theoretical construct, right? So having a seat at a table where our views and values and our wants and needs and dreams and aspirations to be heard, that's just a no-brainer for us as Yolŋu people. Of course, we're going to vote yes to hopefully ensure that will become the normal rather than just being a sporadic thing.
Yeah. Marcia?
Well, it's been a real pleasure listening to you, Gartu, as we pay respects to our teacher and elder, Professor Gumbula, and show our appreciation for all that he gave us. We learned so much from him. And I know, speaking for myself, that I will be very grateful all my life for his wonderful wisdom. I wish that other people had the opportunity that we had. That's not possible now, but what a wonderful opportunity we had. I guess I'm kind of speechless at the moment, but thank you so much for joining us today to make this acknowledgement of his...
Thank you. And I just say on behalf of everybody, we're deeply honoured and forever grateful that we were all able to be there in the way. It's a great honour and, a privilege to be with people when they transition from the physical world back to the spirit world. And, the love and the care and the kindness and just humanity of you all being there as well, not just as colleagues but as part of our family and part of our community. It's felt deep in our hearts. So, thank you both and thank you both. When that all happens. Make it keep on and, let's make him proud, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Buttercup.
Yo.
It is very hard to say goodbye. Very, very hard.